Hello, Hub Study kids. How are you all doing today? I would love to hear or let your family hear about your good things that happened to you this week. Did you have such a wonderful time in the sunshine? I know that it's supposed to be rainy this weekend, but I had a good time in the sun and got to play with some sprinklers and get some tan going, and it felt really good to be in the sunshine again. But I'm also excited about the rain because I love rain so much, and we haven't had enough of it for me to be tired of it yet. And rain helps the flowers grow, and I really, really love flowers too. So what are your good things? Do you remember what book we are in right now? We've had a couple of weeks in the book of Mark. And say with me where Mark is in the Bible. Is it the Old Testament or New Testament? New Testament. And let's say where it is. Matthew, Mark. So it's the second book in the New Testament. And even though it's the second book, I don't know who chose, I know who chose the orders, but I don't know why they put Mark as the second book in the Bible when it was actually probably written first. So that's an interesting little bit of information to know. So far, Jesus has started his ministry. He was baptized, he went to the wilderness, and he came out and he started healing people. And I don't know if you remember way back in John, but John takes a lot longer to talk about the events of Jesus' life than Mark does. He kind of structures his book a lot faster. And so lots has happened in between when Jesus started his ministry and this first story in Mark. But this is the first story in Mark, so that's what we're going to talk about. And so he has healed a bunch of people. He got a demon out of somebody, and he is astounding people all over with the authority with which he speaks. We talked about that word authority, and it's somebody who has the right to talk about what they're saying and that people should listen because they're speaking as somebody who knows what they're talking about. And interestingly, I was reading somewhere that authority also has the word author in it, which Jesus is the author of all of creation. And so of course he has authority to speak about it because he created it. I thought that was pretty cool. The word authority and author are pretty much they sound the same. So that's pretty cool. So one of the things that hopefully you're reading along as a family, because we're not going to be able to read together everything that happens in the book of Mark, but Jesus had healed a man with leprosy. And I just wanted to talk about that a little bit, even though we didn't talk about it and have kids. Leprosy was a disease that is very contagious. Contagious means that it's easy to get it from other people. And it affected a person's skin, and it created all sorts of rashes, and it was very ugly to look at. And it eventually, because they didn't have medicine back then, it eventually would kill the person who had leprosy. And leprosy tends to be a kind of a symbol too. It was a real thing, but it also became a symbol of somebody who wasn't invited into the community, of somebody who was unclean, because if you had leprosy, you got kicked out of the whole city because everyone was so afraid to get leprosy from you. And so we saw this beautiful story where Jesus actually touched somebody who had leprosy, which was a big deal because we have a better idea of what this must have been like for that man in this time of COVID, where you have to stay 6 feet apart and you have to wear a mask all of the time. It feels really lonely, even when you see other people. The fact that nobody can touch you is so lonely. And we are meant to be people who live in a community with other people. And so this example of this man who was healed with leprosy, and Jesus does that all the time. touching that person, it is Jesus showing that he can make the things that are unclean, he makes them clean again. And that's pretty great. And that leads us into this story that we're talking about today too, which is Mark 2, 1 through 12. Another story about Jesus healing people. So if you want to open up a Bible and go to Mark 1 through 2, and I will read it to us. And when he returned to Capernaum after some days, it was reported that he was at home, and many were gathered together, so that there was no more room, not even at the door, and he was preaching the word to them. And they came, bringing to him a paralytic carried by 4 men. I meant to mention that. A paralytic is somebody who cannot walk. Usually there's something that happened to their back so that they still have legs, but they're not able to use those legs to walk. So that's what a paralytic is. So he was preaching the word to them, and they came, bringing to him a paralytic carried by 4 men. And when they could not get near him because of the crowd, they removed the roof above him, and when they had made an opening, they let down the bed on which the paralytic lay. And when Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "Son, your sins are forgiven." Now some of the scribes were sitting there questioning in their hearts, "Why does this man speak like that? He is blaspheming. Who can forgive sins but God alone?" And immediately Jesus, perceiving in his spirit that they thus questioned within themselves, said to them, "Why do you question these things in your heart? Which is easier, to say to the paralytic, 'Your sins are forgiven,' or to say, 'Rise and take up your bed and walk'? But that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins," he said to the paralytic, "I say to you, rise, pick up your bed, and go home." And he rose and immediately picked up his bed and went out before them all, so that they were all amazed and glorified God, saying, "We never saw anything like this." So right there, I want you to pause and talk about what you remember from the story. There's some parts a little confusing because they keep using he, that pronoun, and you have to pay close attention to understand what he they're talking about. So ready? So what happened? We know that Jesus healed a bunch of people, and this is a good example of this. And how did the Pharisees feel about that story, about what happened? It's interesting because they knew that only God could save those sins. So did they think Jesus was God immediately? No, they got mad at him because Jesus didn't say, "Pick up your mat and walk away," and perform that miracle. He went deeper into that man because that man's legs didn't work, but his heart was also broken. His legs and his heart was broken. And Jesus saw that. He saw that he needed to go deeper than healing that man's legs. He needed to heal that man's heart, which is pretty amazing. What does this healing, what do all these healings, but this healing in particular, teach us about Jesus? One, it comes back to kind of that authorship. He tells us that he is God. This story tells us that he is God. At the beginning of the Bible, all the way back in Genesis, we see that God spoke the world into being. He is the author. The whole universe obeyed his words, and he made the sky and the plants and the animals. How did he do that? Just by his words. He said, "Let there be light," and there was light. We know that the words of God are so, so powerful. So this is Jesus showing that he is God. He can say to this man, "Walk," and that man can walk. He can say, "Your sins are forgiven," and that man's sins are forgiven. That is amazing. And it shows us that Jesus has the authority of God. Even the diseases and the brokenness in our bodies listen to God, so we know that our hearts can as well. He cares about more than just our bodies. Does he say to this man, get up and walk? Eventually he does. But the first thing he said was, your sins are forgiven. Why do you think he says that? We talked a little bit about that. Jesus cares about us. He cares what is in our hearts. He cares about who we are. And sometimes this gets at this and teaches us that sometimes we have this dream that's in our hearts. And we say to ourselves, if only this could happen, then everything would be okay. If only this one thing would come true, then I would be happy. And this man probably thought that. He probably thought, if I could only walk, then I could earn money and I wouldn't be dependent on my friends. If I could only get Jesus to heal my legs, then everything else would fall into place in my life. I know I have thought those things before. And the problem with that is it's never enough. That thing happens, and then we're still not satisfied. This is like the Israelites. We see this story in Exodus. What do they say to Moses? We just want to be freed. We don't want to be slaves anymore. Get us out of Egypt. And as soon as they get out of Egypt, what do they say? But we need bread. We need safety. We need all of these things. And they never are satisfied because they're looking to things to fill their hearts. They're not looking to Jesus, because Jesus is the only thing in the whole world that can fill us so completely that we don't need circumstances or things to happen to make us happy or to make us fulfilled. We talk a lot about how Jesus' time on earth gives us little windows into heaven. Do you remember we were talking about that? It's been a while. That windows into heaven are like little glimpses of what this earth was supposed to be like when God created it. What God created for us and what was supposed to be the way the world was. But then sin entered the world when Adam and Eve disobeyed God. And so now we live in a broken world that is not the way that it was supposed to be. But then Jesus came into this earth and he put on flesh and he showed us, he gave us little opportunities to look through these little windows and see what God's design was. And it also shows us what we get to look forward to when we get to be in that new heaven and the new earth when Jesus comes back again. So this is an example of that. And what does this miracle teach us? It teaches us that little glimpse is that there is no pain. There's no suffering. There's no people who can't use their legs right. Our bodies are not going to be broken in this new world. All of Jesus's miracles, he heals sickness and he heals death and he heals things like leprosy and diseases and legs not working and blindness. He does all of those things and they show us that that is the way we were supposed to live. That is the way our lives were supposed to look like, the way God created us. And that's why when things like that happen, we feel deep in our hearts that that is not right. People shouldn't have injuries to their back so that they can't walk anymore. People shouldn't be sick. COVID shouldn't be a thing. But it is because sin entered into the world. But there's good news because Jesus also came into the world and he not only can heal those things, but more importantly, he heals our hearts. Because the reality is, does he always choose to heal those diseases? No, he doesn't. And we don't know all the reasons why God chooses to heal some people and not others. But I do know that he always heals our hearts. And he makes good things out of even those terrible situations that happen. So that is what Jesus teaches us with his healing. He can bring healing that goes deeper than the things we want and the things we think we want. What does this passage teach you about yourself? I know when I read this, it made me think of all of the times I have thought that if I only had whatever then, and it reminds me of how Jesus cares so much more about my heart than the things that happen, and even healing things. It also teaches me that there's no way for me to save or heal myself, my heart or my body. It always needs to be from Jesus. Is there anything on this earth that will fulfill you and make you so content that you want nothing else? Nope. But I also know that it's a really hard thing to get to the place where I'm not always thinking about it. We are all like the Israelites, and we're constantly forgetting who Jesus is. And so we have to remind each other that Jesus is good all of the time. So if we can't save ourselves, only Jesus can, then what do we need to do to get that healing? What is this passage of Mark, this paralytic man, what does that teach us about what we need to do to be healed by Jesus? What did he do? He just showed up. Any way possible. He had his friends lower him through the ceiling, any way possible, because he wanted to be next to Jesus so bad that he was willing to do anything. And all he had to do was show up. And that's all we have to do too. We just have to say, Jesus, I need you. I want you to heal me. And Jesus does that. And we don't have to go anywhere. Nobody has to drop us through a ceiling to get to that place. So that's pretty great too. So I have a couple crafts for you today that will be posted on the links in the bio. I have this cute little paralytic man. And if you can do paper, or I did some popsicle sticks, and we can lower him through the ceiling just like that. I tied some string to it. I did not color my little man, but I hope you do. So here's one craft. And I also have a coloring sheet for you. And it's clearly from our story today. So those links will be on the YouTube page, and I hope you have a fantastic week, and I'm excited to see you again soon.